I passed all 3 CFA exams on the first attempt. So here are the study strategies that I would use again to pass the level 1 exam in 2023. The number one factor in your ability to pass any CFA exam is the hours that you put in. Right away, let's talk about this common notion that every level of the CFA takes 300 hours of study to pass. 300 hours is a very commonly used benchmark. People talk about it all the time. There's even a website that I've referenced in other videos named after that idea. But you need to remember that the CFA exams are very hard, and because of that, most people fail. The percentage of level 1 candidates who ultimately become charter holders is somewhere around 10% or less. So if the average candidate is studying 300 hours for each test and 90% of candidates don't pass all the tests, you need to be doing more than the average, a lot more. I studied 470 hours for level 1, about 620 hours for level 2, and somewhere around 580 hours for level 3. The reason I know those numbers is because I logged my hours after every day of study, and I think this is important. If I was going to take the level 1 exam again, I would certainly log my hours. Logging your hours forces you to be honest with yourself about how much total time is spent studying. It also forces you to keep yourself accountable, to make sure you do what you need to do to be able to type in the 3 or whatever your daily hourly study schedule calls for. The common argument against this is that just sitting there studying doesn't count and isn't helpful. It's actually learning the material, and you shouldn't worry about hours. You should just make sure you understand every LOS and you know how to answer the questions. And that sentiment is very true. The problem is that I know for myself, I become too distracted when I'm just sitting there focusing on learning something. I needed something more concrete that I had to hold myself accountable to, and I think that will help many other people as well. You can switch up how you get these hours in depending on your life schedule, but I recommend trying to do something around 20 hours a week. It was very simple for me to do 3 hours per day every single day of the week. And it's probably worth noting that I never skipped a single day. I studied 7 days a week for 6 months for level 1, 7.5 months for level 2, and 7 months for level 3, never missing a single day during those 6 to 7 month windows. And never missing a single day, again, just forces you to remain accountable to putting in the work that you know you're gonna need to do to pass any of these tests. Again, maybe you can miss some days here and there, and you're still gonna get enough hours in to learn all the material to be able to pass, so you don't necessarily need to do every single day without fail. But back to the piece about accountability, for me, it was something I decided I was gonna hold myself to, because in my mind, the worst case scenario when involved in the CFA program is to get very close to passing one of the exams, but not quite clearing it, and then having to spend an entire additional year studying for that same test, and then getting very close again and not quite clearing it again. So in my mind, I was going to build out a study strategy that I could be confident everything I did during that strategy was me putting in 100% effort towards the test, such that if I were to fail any exam, I would know that it was because I just didn't quite have the aptitude to clear it, not for lack of effort. And so I would not feel the need to enroll and try again. I would know that I did literally everything I could have done to prepare myself for that test. And since I didn't clear it, it's just not likely going to happen. So I don't have to worry about dedicating another year of my life to struggling at this. So if you can make it work in your schedule, I would definitely recommend shooting for 500 total hours, maybe 3 a day, or maybe 0 on the weekdays, but 10 hours on each of the weekend days if it works for you, and logging those hours so that you know you put in the amount of time so that you're requiring yourself to get the work done that you need to get done to be able to be well prepared. Then back to the point about needing good study hours, it is certainly true. So if I was ever distracted, which happened very often, and I spent 10 minutes here or 20 minutes scrolling through Facebook or something like that, I would tack on that time. I would kind of track it and be like, shoot, I just didn't study for 15 minutes. I need to tack on 15 minutes to the end of my study session each day. And that was helpful for 2 reasons. Number one, it forced me to actually do the 3 good hours each day that I know I would need to do to be well prepared. But also it acted as a very strong motivator to not get distracted doing those other things that aren't studying, because I knew that if I did, I was gonna force myself to add the time on. There were days where I would add an hour or an hour and a half onto the end of my study session, and so I'd be up till like 11:30 p.m. still studying, and forcing yourself to do that is very motivating to not let yourself get distracted the next day. So it was a useful tool for me. Now let's talk about how you structure your learning path and how you structure your daily study schedules. It's not as important as just putting in the hours, but it can be useful if you're able to optimize how each of those 3 hours is spent every day. CFA. First of all, I'll just mention, because I get asked this question a lot, what order did you study the books of the CFA curriculum through? It really wasn't important to me. I just went through them chronologically, which is like ethics, corporate finance, economics, quantitative methods, so on and so on, something like that. Now, there may be some marginal benefit to order the books that you study through based on things that follow other books. It could be helpful to study equity right after econ or something to that effect, but I don't think the benefit is going to be so great that you're going to do that much more on the test. So for me, it was just easier to go chronologically. I kind of liked the feeling of progressing through the content. I used a third-party test prep provider, so I progressed through all the video lessons in order, and it felt good to kind of track my progress, I guess, through the material. So each day's study session looked like, well, it would start off with wherever I left off on the prior day, because really after that 3-hour period, I would just stop where I was at, make a little note, and pick up right there the next evening. So it's just starting where I left off, but typically the flow went, watch the video lesson from the third-party test prep provider that I used, which I'll talk about in a moment. Or if I was like driving somewhere or on a trip with family and I didn't have my laptop, I would just bring their hard copy study notes and I would go through the study notes, which is basically what the video lessons were anyway. And then after finishing the video lesson or the study notes about each LOS, I would do all of the quiz questions that the test prep provider put together to make sure I had sort of followed the information that they were presenting to me. And then I would do this for every LOS in a book. So let's say we're talking about economics. Watch the video lesson for LOS 1, do the 12 quiz questions. Watch the video lesson for LOS 2, do the 12 quiz questions, or 15, whatever. Next day, maybe I got some time to study at work, so I read the study notes in the physical book, did all the quiz questions until I completed all of the material from the third-party test prep provider for the entire economics book. Then, after completing everything related to econ that the prep provider offered me, I went to the CFA text and did not read any of the text, but I would solve all of the blue boxes and then all of the EOC, end of chapter questions. So when I get asked, should I use the CFA material to prep? And my answer typically is, if you're using a third-party provider, no, you don't want to read through the curriculum, but you should do all the blue boxes and EOCs still, because they are extremely valuable practice questions. They're going to be much more similar to the type of content you'll see on the real CFA exam than those quizzes put together by your test prep provider. The blue boxes and EOC questions will also force you to think, or at least answer questions in a specific order that the CFA Institute asks them in, or a specific format that they ask them in, rather than what may be a simplified format in a study note and a quiz question. Anyway, the point is, blue boxes and EOCs, very important. I would recommend doing all of them for every book in the curriculum. Sticking with this econ example, after I finished all the blue boxes and EOCs and answered them all correctly using the answer guides provided in the CFA curriculum, I would say, okay, great, I'm done with the econ book. Now I'm going to move on to the next one, which might be fixed income. And I would start back with the test prep provider, watching video lessons, doing study notes, and doing their quizzes, progressing through the fixed income material. We should pause here and talk about third-party test prep providers a minute, just because I've been talking about mine so much. And I want to be transparent because everyone always asks the question. I used Wiley throughout all 3 levels of the CFA curriculum. Specifically, I think I used their gold course, which was something like $1,000 each year. I was lucky because my employer was paying for any material I deemed necessary, and I thought Wiley was very beneficial. I don't necessarily want to endorse them or say that they're the best test prep provider, probably not the best value since they are relatively expensive, but they had a lot of good content and I thought it helped me prepare well and efficiently. There are other value options out there. Mark Meldrum is a really popular one online. There are a handful of up and coming or newer test prep providers that you can do a monthly subscription through. You can buy the whole package for $200 or $300, which is a lot cheaper than the premium options of Wiley or Kaplan. I would certainly recommend you spend some time Googling or try to find some people who have studied with any given test prep provider previously to ask them about what their experience was before you commit to one of these, because ideally would like to use one test prep provider through all 3 levels. At least that was my mentality, because you're going to have similarity in the way the information is presented to you, which can be helpful with your learning process. You definitely don't want to be switching between different test prep providers in any level, like, during a 3-month period in which you're studying for the level 1 exam. That could get really costly and confusing and things would be out of order. So do a little bit of research. You can ask me questions if you'd like in the comment section below. I'm happy to share my unbiased, honest opinion on any of these things, but I do think that they can make studying more efficient. You don't need them, There are plenty of people who pass all of the CFA exams studying only with the curriculum that the Institute provides, but it's probably a lot slower. And I'm a relatively slow reader, so I know if I was going to read through every word in the curriculum, I would have needed way more than 500 or 600 hours to study for these exams, because that stuff is dense. And for me, video lessons are a much easier way to digest information. But then again, blue boxes and EOCs are really the important bit. Those are where you get the best practice, so don't forget about those either way. I should also mention that it isn't necessarily the quickest way of studying to watch an entire book's worth of video lessons or read all the study notes for that book, and then go back to the CFA curriculum to do all their practice questions, blue boxes and EOCs. It really is kind of doubling your work, but it was still slightly efficient, I think, just because the test prep provider info is pretty concise. It also forces you to do a bit of a review in the weeks after first passing through it when you go back and do all those CFA practice questions. So there's a positive element there. But again, my approach was not one to be quick. It was one to be very thorough and comprehensive, such that if I ever failed a test, I would know that I did everything in my power to try to pass that test, and there's no marginal improvement I could have made, such that I would always be thinking, man, if I would have done this just a little bit differently, I could have passed, and then I might try to sign up again in the future and fail again, and just spend a lot of years of your life studying for these exams. It's something I didn't want to do. About 6 to 8 weeks out is when I recommend starting to take mock exams. And mock exams, they're going to provide you with a lot more practice in knowing information and answering questions correctly. Every mock can be a little bit different. For me, I got 2 mock exams from Wiley, my test prep provider. I got 2 mock exams each year published by the CFA Institute. Back then, they were also publishing prior year's examples of whatever level exam you're studying for on their website with actual, slightly modified, but pretty similar, the real questions and answers that came from the live exams of prior years. I don't think they post those on their website anymore. But because they did this for a long time, there were also Google Drive folders that you could find publicly that had plenty of past year's mock exams, or at least practice exams that were given by the Institute that you can use to study with. Very importantly, I did not treat any of these mock exams like actual mock exams. I treated them like more practice questions, and I would answer them that way. I would just go through blocks of 10 to 20 questions, no matter which mock exam format I was doing, answer all the questions, even using my cheat sheets and formula sheets and all that. So I'm not actually even performing to the highest extent in answering these questions yet. I'm still just developing familiarity and learning and checking the knowledge that I hopefully have developed over the prior 6 months of studying. And if you do this the same way I did, meaning you will have answered hundreds, if not 1,000 or maybe thousands of practice questions and quiz questions just from the test prep provider, and then all of the blue boxes and all of the EOC examples and all the CFA curriculum, and then hundreds and hundreds of more practice questions in what are hopefully very reputable mock exams, you will have answered at this point certainly over multiple thousands of practice questions, and if you're studying well, answered them correctly, or at least seen the correct answers and then learned from those. So I think you might see here why this test preparation process that I used is so comprehensive. You are definitely going to have gotten exposure to just about everything and anything the Institute can ask you on exam day. You could be wondering, hey AJ, someone told me it was really beneficial to practice a mock exam like a real mock exam. Isn't that the case? I do believe there's some benefit to it. I don't think that benefit is huge, especially not for level 1, mostly for the level 3 AM section, but not for the level 1 exam, because on the level 1 exam, you'll find that you have more time relative to the next 2 levels to answer all of the questions on it. So making sure you can get things done in a very fast manner is relatively less important, but it can still be beneficial to take one actual real live timed regular mock exam just to replicate the exam day experience. So the way I did this was with one of the Kaplan live mock offerings that they do in metropolitan areas across the United States. You just have to check with your local CFA societies to see if they're sponsoring any Kaplan live mock day. And it's usually a few weeks or a month out from the real exam. On a Saturday, you go to some location. For me, it was a college in a city about an hour away from where I live, and they would replicate a real exam, and they'd give you an additional mock. So it's one other way to get more mock questions that you could use to time out your process. You had the 1 hour lunch break, you came back, you did the PM section. It really forced you to study a lot that day and get an idea for what that exam day experience is like. I should mention too that I did these live mocks 5, 6, 7 years ago when the exams were paper-based. So now that they're computer-based, I'm not totally sure if Kaplan offers live mocks in the exact same way. I would bet they do, but they might look a little bit different since on exam day, you're just sitting at a computer taking your exam on your screen anyway. The final and biggest differentiating point that I always call the secret to my CFA study process was memorizing formulas in the last few days. Memorizing formulas is not the number one factor. Again, that's the amount of time you spend learning all the material, but it is the biggest differentiator, in my opinion, from those candidates who will pass and those who will fail. If you pooled all the candidates who cleared it and those who didn't, and you asked them a lot of questions about how they studied and ran a regression on the significance of those factors, I think memorizing formulas would be very statistically significant. So this is a process that I didn't develop myself. I got from Mark Meldrum in a recommendation. He just uploaded a video maybe 6 years ago that I watched where he said, hey, if you're gonna take the level 1 exam, you definitely need to spend at least 24 to 48 hours memorizing every formula you could possibly need on that test. And I was like, oh man, do I really need to do that? But I took his word for it, and I dedicated 2 full days, about 12 hours each day, so 24 total hours, to memorizing all the formulas that I had come across for any question on the level 1 exam. An important part of being able to do this is having a concise list of all those formulas. Now, if you used a test prep provider, they probably offer a formula sheet, but again, I used Wiley, and I had access to the Wiley formula sheet, and I felt that it was no good. Specifically, it was way too long and included way more information than you actually needed to memorize to be able to answer all the types of questions you could see correctly. So I made concise handwritten formula sheets throughout my 6 months of study, and then I double checked that against the Wiley formula sheets when I went to study to make sure everything was right. You can see the exact formula sheets that I used during my 3 years of CFA studying and test taking on my Patreon page. So I'll have a link in the description down below if you want to look at my formula sheets on my Patreon. I do think that those formula sheets are very valuable study tools, and they include just about everything that you would need to memorize to be able to answer all the questions right. Once you have a good list of formulas to study from, the process goes handwrite each formula 20 times, close your eyes or cover the sheet and re-recite a formula in your head. Make sure you know it, move on to the next one. Basically rinse and repeat for 12 hours straight until you've ground all of these formulas into your brain. I have a few other videos on the channel about the secret to passing the CFA exams where I dig into that process in much more detail. I describe what Mark Meldrum prescribed to me originally, and then I also describe exactly how I went about this process during the last 72 hours before I would sit for the test. So if you want to hear more details on that, check out any of those videos. My very last tip is that the day before the exam, you do nothing, you don't memorize formulas anymore, and you just give your mind some time to relax. Maybe shoot some hoops, go to the gym, go golfing or something, or read a good book. Be productive around the house, clean, do laundry, things like that. Don't just sit around and watch Netflix all day. You'll feel groggy and lazy, and that does not stimulate your brain for good sleep that night and good performance the next day. You need to do things that are good for your mind, but are not mentally strenuous. You really want to give your mind a break so that it's best rested to prepare well the following day. There are some people who would try to do more practice questions or memorize those formulas on the day before the exam, take another mock exam. My point is that if you've prepared correctly, you should have been preparing for the past 6 to 9 months. And so one extra day of this stuff is not going to give you that much more marginal information, but resting could make your brain 10% more efficient at recalling information. And so being more efficient at getting access to all this stuff you've covered is a lot better than knowing 1% or 2% more stuff when you sit down for exam day. So just rest. Wear a full suit and tie. There's a dress code that the Institute imposes at all of the testing centers. Previously, it was in these big testing locations where they'd have hundreds or thousands of us pulled together. Now they're in prometric testing centers, but the proctors know that the CFA Institute imposes a dress code. You need to have black suit, black tie, and also in some regions of the world, they impose the requirement of a 3-piece tuxedo with a top hat and a cane and a long black tail and all. You need to be looking your best to perform well, so don't wear sweats, certainly. Don't wear jeans and a t-shirt. Don't wear khakis. Don't wear your regular Brooks Brothers collared shirts. You need to be wearing a black tuxedo. This is a formal event. And if you don't want to get kicked out immediately when you walk into the exam center, make sure that you're well prepared. Thanks for sticking around for this whole video. As always, have a good one.